ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
It isn't Christmas season just yet, but it really did feel like oranges were roasting over a chestnut fire this week at Chestnut Hill. Christian Guzman here alongside Andy Prigler, no Steve Heller this week, as we join you on the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network, as Syracuse losing in brutal fashion to Boston College. 37-31, I believe, was the final score. And in a theme that is kind of just followed Syracuse in losses over the past decade or so.
Not what you want. There's really no easy way to slice this out. Yes, Syracuse outgained Boston College 431 to 378, but it's really the EPA that gets you, because Syracuse was looking at 8.2 yards per pass, which is very good. We've known this. The passing offense has been great, 31 of 48. That 8.2 is exactly what you want. Problem is that on the other side of the ball, Boston College rushing the ball, 313 rushing yards, 6.1 yards per attempted rush. You are not going to win any game where an opponent is able to get more than 6 yards per attempted rush, and they are able to rush the ball 51 times in the game. It's just one of these things that, you and I were kind of talking about this off air. We'll get into it. The problem for Syracuse that we knew was going to bite them at some point was depth along the defensive line. It was the weakest position coming into the season. They tried to make up for it by using an aggressive amount of rotation to take advantage of their depth, and then the depth went out the window. So what you're left with is a group of guys who quite candidly aren't good enough to play and win the starting jobs themselves, and are now being asked to take the majority of snaps along the defensive line. It's obviously not what you want. And when you're a team like Boston College that has a very singular way of playing, if you are physically and mentally and just don't have the skills to be up for that task, there's very little chance you're going to come out with a win there.
It's tough when, like you said, Andy, it's very, very clear what a team was going to do, and you are just very, very, very powerless to stop it. And I don't think that, it was obviously very clear to see what, Boston College was not going to do, and that was pass the ball, like as you mentioned, and even putting in their backup QB instead of Castellanos, and then having essentially their fourth string running back also do what they did, or what he did to Syracuse, which is just kind of indicative of what we've seen from Syracuse teams in the past. And while you can put some blame on the offensive line, I think that is, on the defensive line, I think you can put some blame on the defensive line. When you look at the PFF stats, two of the three top defensive linemen, two of the top three graded players in an overall defensive grade were defensive linemen. Rashard Perry was the highest graded player with not an insignificant amount of snaps either. He played 31 of the 64 snaps logged on defense. And then in third is Murad Watson, who played 29 of the 64 snaps logged on defense. It just it's tough to pinpoint the actual problem, which is really, really bad for Syracuse right now in this stage of the season.
Yeah, I think you can kind of break this out into like diving into the numbers a little bit more. So again, when you take a look at the run defense, the run defensive grades that were handed out, Rashad Perry was the highest rated Syracuse player. He got an 84. That's really solid. You're then looking at, secondary players, Barron and Clarence Lewis, who were asked to fill in. You've got Fadil Diggs, who's been excellent. And then you've got Murad Watson in there, who played 29 snaps. He is the fifth highest rated run defender. After that, you start getting into like the players that are just kind of average grades. And that's where you're going to find Chase Simmons on the defensive end, Marlo Wax in the middle of that defense, Isaiah Hastings on the other side of the ball. And below them is where you start getting into guys who are below average. And that's where you start seeing, Derek McDonald and Elijah Fuentes Cardiff. And again, holistically speaking, I don't think anybody played that poorly per se. It's just a battle that when you then flip and look on the other side, when you look at the offensive grades for Boston College, the run blocking was just simply not there from a grading perspective. It's actually kind of funny when you take a look at the Boston College grades. When you take a look at the snaps, they mostly graded out really well in pass blocking and not run blocking. Lots of 80s in that sense. And I think it goes into, Pro Football Focus's premium stats. If you ask them what the issue with this game was, Syracuse ended up with a 54 grade in pass rush. And I think that this is all kind of a symptom of the idea that Syracuse is having a really hard time getting into the backfield. And offensive lines might not be doing a great job blocking, but they're doing a great job holding that point of attack. And this is something that Steve talks about with the Syracuse offense. The trouble that the Syracuse offense has is that it often is stuck in this position where it doesn't know where to go because we're waiting on the result of a run-pass option. Boston College was essentially able to say, we're going to run the ball or we're going to pass the ball, and they were able to hold the line the entire time. And when you're able to do that, things just come easy from there. It allows a running back to more effectively determine the hole and be able to hit the hole hard. From a passing perspective, a quarterback who doesn't get rushed is obviously in an ideal situation. And I think that this has been probably one of the biggest issues that we've, seen with Syracuse all year on the defensive side of the ball. Outside of Fadil Diggs, there has been almost zero pressure in the backfield this season for the Orange. And I do think part of that is just due to personnel. Not having Marlo Wax for such a long period of time impacted that. But even then, Wax is not necessarily a live in the backfield type linebacker. There, without Diggs doing what Diggs does, there isn't a real true edge rusher on this team to kind of take advantage. And the middle linebackers are all primarily built in that old 3-3-5 system that we were recruiting for, where it's less about getting into the backfield and more about filling in gaps that open up and attacking those gaps at angles. And so you end up with this awkward transition phase where I think Robinson, defensive coordinator Elijah Robinson, is going to get blamed a lot for this. But there's only so much you can do when you're going from such a drastic shift from point A to point B, and the team just doesn't have the necessary personnel to execute that more traditional type of defense.
I think we kind of really underestimated the loss of Stephon Thompson and Leon Rowley to this team of pure linebackers whose main job was to put their head down and rush the quarterback. Because when you look at not just the 3-3-5, but also what the 4-2-5 is, the defensive line, as we've said most of the time, analyzing this defense, the defensive line's main job usually isn't to develop that type of pressure that a Fadil Diggs can. The defensive line's job is mainly to keep the offensive line preoccupied with them so that the linebackers can go in and do the damage. And so when you have a BC team who can even still, and maybe Syracuse is a little bit shell-shocked from Virginia Tech as well with this, a team that has a quarterback who can run, you freeze the most dynamic linebackers on the team in terms of Wax and Barron, who aren't necessarily going to always be head down or rush quarterback. They're going to spend a good chunk, over 60% of the game, as a spy and a holding linebacker and a linebacker who is going to wait for the play to develop to determine their option. Then you also have like the edge rushers on the Syracuse side, who are not always, like you said, Andy, used to being the edge rusher that you need them to be. And that's also where you see the failure of one of my biggest issues with defense, the Syracuse defense this year, is just the severe lack of good edge contain. which is
Yeah.
allowing for just outside run after outside run to chunk the Syracuse off defense.
Yeah, I think that this all kind of goes back to a situation where I think we've seen the cracks in this team. Like, we're talking about things that have hurt Syracuse at different times of the season. Like, when we're talking about not being able to seal the edges, I'm hearing the Ohio game, front and center. When we're talking about not getting into the backfield and not being able to really contain a quarterback, I'm thinking of the UNLV game or the NC State game. There's just been a lot of consistency here with these kinds of particular players that you're lacking. And I do think that a team like Boston College that is very one-track minded, if you get them out of their game script, they can be had. And they have been had this season with in games like that. The problem was that Syracuse was never really able to do anything to push them out of that script. They came out real strong in the second half, and I think that that's probably your point to grow on off of this game, is that coming out of the second half, I'm just taking a look at the play-by-plays here. After halftime, we are, let's see, end of the second quarter. Let me make sure here. Yeah. It went punt, touchdown, 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 punt, end of game. So again, not really stopping them, but going into the second quarter, they had gotten a punt and an interception off of BC. So you had a three straight drives where you held BC to 3 plays and you were able to keep them off of the scoreboard, which is proof that there is a way to stop, that this defense can stop other teams. The problem is they just can't do it consistently. And I think that this is where, not to turn the tables here and automatically switch to the offense here, but I do think that once this game kind of turned into a shootout, the offense's slow start really kind of loomed large here. And again, it feels difficult to blame a game where you gave up 37 points to blame that on the offense. But there was a lot of sloppy play here from the offense all the way through until the first touchdown drive in the second quarter, where Syracuse was just looking like the team that was broken from the Pitt game, as opposed to a team that had an extra few days of rest to really work out the kinks in that offense.
Do yourself a favor. Do not look at Josh Aloha and Demetrius Weatherspoon's PFF pass blocking grades. Or do, because I know you like that type of torture in your life.
I do enjoy pain. And it's not my favorite thing to look at, but oh my.
Yeah,
oh my.
There you go.
A 27 and a 10 are not what you want.
And these are out of 100, with 60 being your baseline grade.
Yeah. And to be fair, Weatherspoon has had a few clunkers this season. He was really bad in the Stanford game, really bad in the Pitt game. Another not so great effort here. But one of the things that happened here is that he only got 22 snaps, and Wallabaugh came in and was the best pass blocker here. I do think that, again, when you don't have a mobile quarterback, that left tackle spot becomes really important. And it was not going great for Syracuse early from that left tackle spot.
And that's why you saw Wallabaugh come in and move over to that side as well. As well was just Fran in general. And if it was Fran, if it was Dale Williams, whoever, just in general, Jeff Nixon even, we're just trying to trot out like different offensive line combinations and saying, okay, we got to throw something out there on the window and see if it sticks. Because McCord was the best player on the Syracuse team. Again, I mean, he graded out in an 88.7, nearly 400 yards. It's hard to put the blame of this game, like you said, Andy, on the offense. But you know that the offense is the strength of this team. And like you're going to, if this team wins or loses games, it's going to be off the strength of its offense. The defense can only do so much. Obviously, you'd like the defense to help out a lot more than it did against the Eagles this past weekend. But what did Syracuse do to come back in the UNLV game? It relied on the strength of its offense. What did Syracuse do to come back against Virginia Tech? okay, yes, it was a bit of, the defense also holding its ground, but the offense carried the momentum and drove that team to victory. And so it does feel unfair to criticize the offense for this team, especially in a game like this, where, there were very, very good moments for the offense. But it's the reason why this team is going to win and lose games.
Yeah. And I think that this is the challenge that we have evaluating the Syracuse team. If you look at Bill C's SP Plus spreadsheet, which is publicly available, FYI, the biggest takeaway from this game is that the adjusted margin. So, SP Plus takes a look at the stats, they take a look at the game, and they say, if you play this game 100 times, what's the most likely outcome of this game? It's not Boston College winning this game by 6. It's Boston College winning this game by 2 points, aka a single field goal or a single safety that was given up in this game. And I say that to kind of say that, like, look, the margins here were really close. And at some point in time, we have to kind of realize that this team is very good at passing the ball. And I actually, Christian, I'm going to share this one. I'm not going to put anybody on blast, but you know who you are. I was getting into a texting conversation with a friend who was at the BC game, and he was texting our group chat, and he was just texting like, why don't we run the ball? We can't run the ball when we can't pass block, or we have to run the ball when we can't pass block well. My argument was, well, we can't really run. If we're not run blocking well, we're not going to pass block well either. And in the passing game, we're averaging, 7 yards an attempt versus on running the ball where we're averaging 1 yard per attempt. Like you're kind of boxed in. You're kind of boxed in here. And I say that to say that even after this most recent game here, if you go to CFB graphs on College Football Insiders, Syracuse is still the 25th ranked EPA team in terms of EPA per dropback. Like, this is still an incredibly efficient passing offense, the like that we haven't seen in a very long time at Syracuse. Their best option to win a game is to throw their way out of this, not to run their way out of this. They're 47th in EPA per rushing attempt. Like, this is a team that, like it or not, is going to win a game, get out of a tough situation, make a big play through the air. Having LeQuint Allen is an excellent reason to keep teams honest on the run game, but most teams right now are expecting Syracuse to pass, and so they're attacking weaknesses in the offensive line here through the passing attack. And I think that this is where, Christian, to your point, like, we saw Nixon make changes along the offensive line. We'll talk about Syracuse's next opponent in a little bit here, but I think the biggest takeaway from the offensive side of the ball here is, do you change up the offensive line? It's not what you want to do this late into the season, but Syracuse has its postseason goal checked off. You don't need to try to win more. You're going to go to a different bowl game if you try to win more games, but you're not going to not go to a bowl game by trying to win a different way. And I do think it's really obvious that that left side of the line is just not working out the way it needs to be for Kyle McCord to stay upright enough to make this offense click.
And the worrying thing is that McCord is usually a quarterback who gets rid of the ball quickly. So if he's already running away before he can even decide if he wants to take his first read or not, is worrying that, yes, that merits some discussion of, okay, we've got to try and fix something now. Because if our quarterback, who was a quick-trigger quarterback, is not throwing quickly and running for his life because all of a sudden one side of someone has gotten through, then you've got to change something up. But again, going back to your point, Andy, about Syracuse, the balance of Syracuse run versus pass, this has been a topic of discussion the entire season. Let's remember what Jeff Nixon's offense is. NFL pro style. There are few and far between many offenses, if any. I would say less of a third of the offenses in the NFL who have a close to 50-50 split in run versus pass. Football has become a pass-first league, much like the NBA has become a three-point shooting league. It kind of happened at the same time, funnily enough. But the NFL has realized that, hey, sometimes it's just better to go for a pass on 3 downs and go for something than do Steve's favorite run, pass, punt. And especially when you're going against when you're going with an offensive line who, even when we saw in this game, had some trouble getting some push on designed runs. You gotta go with what you know works and what's gonna win you games. Is LaQuint Allen, by Fran's definition, the best player on this team? And that might be up for debate. You could easily say yes, and I could agree with you in some cases based on the arguments you make. But based on not only how the team is built in terms of personnel on the field, but also of the coaches who are coaching in this room, let's remember who you brought into this room as well. You have Jeff Nixon, multiple years of experience in the NFL. Who's his receivers coach? Ross Douglas, multiple years of experience in the NFL. These are the two guys. These are two of your bigger hires in the offense and in the coaching staff that were splash hires for this football team. And just based on how modern football has been playing, passing is going to take the forefront, especially when you get off to as slow as a start as Syracuse did.
Yeah, and I think that when you take a look across college football right now, again, looking at team EPA per play on offense, again, you can find these stats at College Football Insiders in collegefootballinsiders.com. The top offenses, number 1 is Miami, 2 is Indiana, 3 is Ohio State, 4 is Ole Miss, 5 is Alabama, 6 is Oregon, 7 is Texas, 8 is LSU, 9 is Boise, 10 is Georgia. 2 of those teams have a fundamental rushing attack. However, Indiana has the number 2 overall passing offense, and Boise State has the number 15 overall passing offense. You just cannot run a modern day successful offense based around the running attack.
I'm assuming some of those numbers are. I'm assuming these numbers are based on all FBS teams, right?
Yes, all
and
FBS.
So of the 2 teams you mentioned that were mentioned, so you mentioned Indiana and Boise State. We know those teams like to run. Let's go through some of the other teams. Where do they rank EPA wise rushing?
Miami in rushing, 6th. Ohio State, 4th. Ole Miss, 18th. Alabama, 5th. Oregon, 3rd. Texas, 12th. LSU is the outlier here at 29, but we kind of saw how that worked. And Georgia's 7th. Boise State is number 1, and Indiana is number 9.
Okay.
And so you get into the situation where even looking at Boise, who I think is the poster child this season for run-dominant offense, they still have a top 15 passing offense. You're not going to be able to fudge an offense that is run first, pass never, but you can fudge an offense that's pass first and run never. And Christian, to your point, that's just the way it works. And I think the reason I like to call this out is that if you look at Texas specifically, because Steve Sarkisian, one of the best offensive coordinators in the game across all levels at this point, what he does so well is that he leverages the screen game to open up the traditional run game. And he's not doing bubble screens. He's doing tunnel screens, and he's using guys in motion to give them a head start before the ball gets slung out to them on a screen. If you watch Texas at all, they're throwing screens left and right, but nobody's standing still at any point in time. And I say this because the Syracuse running attack is still very much line guys up and hit them hard and try to push the ball forward. And that's definitely what BC did a lot of in this game and was successful. And to me, that's, again, going back to the defensive side of the ball here. If you can line up and don't use any kind of fancy motion, that is a talent and execution issue on your defense, because that's the easiest thing to stop in modern football right now. And if you're the Syracuse offense, this rushing attack still needs some schematic work, but it's also in a place as we kind of talked about, last week or a couple weeks ago with the RPO game. I just don't know if you have the talent on the offensive line side to really execute that finesse that's necessary for the RPO screen attack that some of these other schools do really well. We see Nixon trying to implement pieces of it left and right, but I do think that, again, this is a helpful reminder. This is year one of a guy who's never been a head coach before, bringing in a lot of new first-time coordinators. This was never going to be smooth sailing from a schematic or an execution point across the board. And again, the numbers say that this game should have been a lot closer than it actually was. And the difference was maybe 2 points and a safety that was taken early in the game when this offense was trying a little bit too hard to run the ball. The safety was in the second half. And yeah, that safety was just so bad. But it's this situation where leading up to it, you want more points off of the offense early on, but they were trying to run the ball and just not able to do it. And you've got those issues along the left side of the line. Like, to me, that's the story of the game here. Less so than the defense being unable to stop a nosebleed.
It's so tough now. Where do you go from here, Syracuse-wise? Because you have so many good things that that you can do as a Syracuse team. But we talked about it at the beginning of the year. The trenches were the weakest part of this team. We knew that on both sides of the ball. And unfortunately, now you've got enough tape on this Syracuse team to know, okay, they're not going to be able to adjust away from the clear weaknesses that they've shown. An offensive line who can't generate enough push to develop the run game, and an offensive line that is susceptible to stunts that can easily get you into the backfield quicker than expected. And then on the defensive side, you've got a defensive side that now is injured to the core, so much so to the point where running the ball should become easier for any team that decides to do it, which is certainly a worrying sign for Syracuse, at least this season. And the thing that you can take away, at least from this season, is that it feels like that this coaching staff, unlike previous coaching staffs, it feels like this coaching staff is actually in a good position to maybe do something about it, just based on, their accolades in the recruiting and transfer portal. Like, they know what they need. And at the very least, you could see that in the offseason, they did their best to address that. You've got two transfers who are starting on the offensive line. Your main defensive tackle and main edge rusher were transfers coming in. One of your key defensive linemen also is a freshman that got recruited in. So there is at least the promise that, okay, they're not just going to sit back and wait for the recruits to try and do something eventually. They're going to go out and try and solve the problem. We were at a point earlier this season where it felt like, okay, one problem gets solved, but now another problem pops up. Unfortunately, now, like I said at the beginning of this, we're at a consistent problem that doesn't feel like it can be solved this season. But fortunately, it feels like there's more hopes that it can be solved in the future and not be a continuing factor, which is one of the reasons why Dino Babers eventually was let go from the program.
Yeah, and I think that when we look at this situation holistically here, you have a coaching staff that proved that it can go out and get key transfers at key positions. And they did so in a truncated window with little to no proof that what this coaching staff was doing would pay dividends. Now there's at least positive proof that, look, we can grab a player and we can give you immediate playing time, and we can get you to a bowl game, and we can completely reinvent you the way that we reinvented Kyle McCord or Jackson Meeks or insert your certain players. Depending on what happens with Barron and Wax in the NFL, that was a pitch that both of them talked about before the season, where Barron was definitely not a guy that was going to get NFL looks. He was looking to transfer and go somewhere that could develop him and get him an undrafted free agency kind of connection there. And he chose to stay at Syracuse because he thought Syracuse could help develop him. And it seems, based off of what we have seen and what we've seen on social, Barron is getting looks at the NFL draft. He'll probably get invited to the combine. He'll be a player that is in the mix. And this is all proof positive for Fran and the rest of the coaching staff to turn around and say, we can improve you here. And we can improve you by playing, not by sitting on the bench and being a practice player. And so when you look at things like the trenches, when you look at maybe better play, more dynamic edge rushers, there's opportunities here for Syracuse to go out, either to go up or to go down. Whether they go down and they pull somebody out who's performing at a high level, who wants a bigger stage. I think that there's arguments to be made that, Syracuse would be a great spot for them. And additionally, we've seen now with, Kyle McCord being the most obvious one, a player who was playing at a quote unquote bigger school, who had a tough break of things and needs a change of scenery, come to Syracuse and completely reinvent yourself. And I'm at the point now where I'm less worried about Fran finding the dynamic players. I'm more interested in seeing how these recruiting classes that are coming in that are more of the freshmen, Fran's first recruiting class, which was so highly rated, freshmen who are turning into sophomores and redshirt freshmen, the new freshmen who are coming in, who are showing a ton of promise to potentially play right away, how they round out the depth here. Because that is the biggest question for the offseason here, is how does Fran Brown, in the era of NIL, in the era of immediate transfers, how does he handle something that, to your point, Christian, we were talking about things that Dino didn't do well. Retaining depth became a massive issue for Dino. And I think that that's going to be Fran's biggest challenge, but I also do think that it's one where I can definitely see a path to success here.
I mean, just look at all the key freshmen that have already played for Syracuse this year. Rod Watson, Marcellus Barnes before he got injured, Seed Haynes before, his personal matters got dealt with. There's an opportunity here for freshmen as well to say, hey, if I go out and play the football I know I can play, we'll get a chance to start here at Syracuse. And it's been a while since a lot of freshmen could have said that at Syracuse.
Yeah.
And because it always felt like Dino felt like the same philosophy of, okay, the seniors are here who have earned it. They've clearly shown me something, and it's going to have to take a world star effort for our freshmen to get significant playing time as a starter, which really didn't happen at Syracuse. Usually you got players who got significant time as a backup, but never as a starter. And usually it was also usually on the defensive end as well, with the linebackers. That's how you saw Marlo Wax got developed. And players like him. Yeah.
And again, this is a lot of offseason talk here. And I do think that this is, we know the issues with this team. Depth is going to be the biggest piece going into this offseason. But if depth is something that you don't want to worry about, such as the depth of your wardrobe when it comes to your Syracuse outfits or your general comfort, may I introduce you to Home Field Apparel, sponsor, as always, of the Disloyal Idiots podcast. Home Field Apparel, maker of the comfiest and finest vintage collegiate apparel that you can find. Bomber jackets, coach jackets, campus classic pullovers, now that we're starting to get into cozy season. Their hoodies and their sweaters are obviously their claim to fame, and they've got some amazing Syracuse members of that collection. Right now, they're starting to do their Black Friday sales. So make sure you pay attention to Home Field Apparel across all socials. Remember, you can always use promo code NUNES24, NUNES24, for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. But if you are like me, or you're like many of our other loyal listeners who have used that code or used other codes in order to purchase at Home Field Apparel before, Stay tuned because we are about to get into the best time of the year, aka home field, discounting things for your family, and then you give yourself a little extra along the way. So again, homefield apparel.com, promo code NEWS24, NUNES24 for 15% off your first order at Homefield Apparel. Christian and I have some home field bonus bucks burning a hole in our pockets that we have to use fairly soon. So you'll see us start getting decked out on the stream as we get close to holiday season here. Very much looking forward to it. One of the schools that is included in the home field apparel collection that I honestly haven't really thought of a whole lot, but I now have to because they are a conference mate of ours, is
Which
the
is still
California
wild
Golden
to say.
Bears. Yes.
Still so wild to say.
Yeah, the fact that the California Golden Bears and that Oski the Bear is now a member
And the Fighting
of
John Consillos.
Yes, is now part of this ACC All Coast Conference is still a bit odd for me.
You know what I just realized?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure John's going to this game.
He is going to this game. The original plan was for John to go to this game. I was trying to convince him to come to Vegas with me, but he said that Berkeley was closer or something like that. How dare I work around a guy who has multiple small children at home? But
children.
I'm a child. I could use supervision.
Me too.
Exactly. So the California
we don't have Steve to provide the necessary balance to our late millennial viewpoints.
No, we do not. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this game, we've seen so far, both in the ACC and in the Big Ten, these new coastal trips don't seem to go well for the road teams. Big favorites tend to win small favorites tend to lose, big home favorites tend to win even bigger. And in this case, California is opening as a 7-point favorite over Syracuse. Bill C's SP Plus has Cal as an 8.7 point favorite over the Orange. This is primarily due to the fact that even though Syracuse's offense outranks Cal's offense overall, Cal's offense is like there's some positive notes here. Before I get into the not so positive notes. So Syracuse's offense, 35th. We talked about the fact that the offense is a top 25 offense. Cal's offense is mid at best. Holistically, they're 60th overall, 47th in the air, 98th in running. They actually have a negative EPA when they try to run the ball, which is good for Syracuse. We just spent talking about how Syracuse is not very good at stopping the run. The issue that we tend to have here when it comes to the Cal Golden Bears is on the defensive side of the ball. And again, this is where I think things are going to get interesting because Cal's defense is not great. It's 51st in EPA, but it is top 50 in passing defense EPA. It means that, and I say all these things to say, SP Plus does like Cal because they do a good job of limiting explosive plays, which is how Syracuse has basically survived to this point. So this could be an interesting matchup. But we're looking at a team that I don't necessarily think could explode on Syracuse the way that other teams have. And I say all this, and then I look at the score. And Christian, did you see what Cal's most recent game was?
The Wake Forest, correct?
Correct. More specifically, Cal got their first ACC win in Winston-Salem, knocking off Wake Forest 46-36. When you take a look at the box score of this game, Cal gained 500 yards of total offense, and they did it mostly through the air. 385 yards of offense, 6.9 yards per pass. They gave up another 7.6 yards per pass, and the big thing was that Wake Forest turned the ball over 4 times. So I say this to you, Christian. I don't think that Cal is a touchdown better than Syracuse. However, if Cal is going to win by a touchdown or more, it's going to be because Syracuse is going to throw the ball often because it's the way to attack Cal's middling defense. The problem is Cal seems very adept at creating turnovers, And I don't know if you know this, but Mr. Kyle McCord seems to have went from protecting the ball very well to now giving the ball to the opposing team with some fair amount of consistency over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that is my big red flag for this week as to what to watch in this upcoming game.
Well, I think it's also because there's a bit more pressure on McCord now, especially with how Syracuse's offenses have started in general, some by his own volition, but it's what's the easiest way to get back into a game? It's to throw yourself back into the game. You don't run yourselves out of situations. You throw yourself out of dire situations. And given how this Syracuse team run blocks, it's going to be tempting, and honestly, Syracuse should just try. And, you've got to trust your quarterback in these situations. And yes, McCord has been a bit of a turnover machine in recent weeks, but that's what you're going to get with McCord. I don't think you're, not expecting that anymore. You've just got to, unfortunately for Syracuse, you just kind of got to work around it because McCord is slowly turning into Giancarlo Stanton in football. It's either a home run or he's quickly walking back to the dugout.
Yeah, I do think that is. I had another friend who reached out to me, and he was essentially like, why don't the numbers, like these projection systems, like Syracuse offense? And I do think that is the numbers are seeing that as well. This offense is a little too boomer bust, while it is still holistically much more efficient per play than we've seen in recent years. This is probably the most efficient offense that we've had since the Eric Dungy days. And those offenses were not loved by the metrics as well, because so much of the offense became, well, it's either a deep play downfield or Dungy's running for his life. And this is a game where I think you can definitely see that play out as well. Like just taking a look at this so far, if you go, PFF keeps track of some of the percentage of run plays versus pass plays. Both teams here are passing the ball over 60% of the time. Both quarterbacks have very good passer ratings when the pocket is clean. Syracuse 99.9, Cal 103.4. The difference is that Syracuse is making a big time throw, aka throw down the field or over the middle of the field 10 yards or more, 5.65% of dropbacks. Cal is only doing that 2.4% of the time, which means that when it goes to the turnover worthy plays, aka percentage of plays that statistically look like could create a turnover, Syracuse is doing those plays on offense 3.4% of the time to Cal's 2.7. So essentially you've got two teams that want to pass the ball, want to pass their way out of a paper bag. The difference is Cal wants to nickel and dime you to death and will do so with a little bit more, will not do so as efficiently as other teams, but they're not going to take the big shot. Kyle McCord and Syracuse want to take that big shot on you. And Cal just learned, look, sometimes it's better to just let them take the deep shot and pick them off when they do it, rather than trying to cover the entire field when they really do want to be pushing the ball down the field. So again, I think one of the things that I have been confused about this year is the lack of Oronde Gadsden in the passing attack. And this feels like the perfect game for Oronde to be used as the big safety net rather than the deep threat, now that more wide receivers are coming back into the fold from a health standpoint.
And this is where we could actually also talk about another small issue with the Syracuse team that has reared its head at times. First of all, this is where it'd be nice to have consistent all 22 to help us, because it feels like Gadsden's getting doubled every single week. And unfortunately for Syracuse, you need some help in order to take that pressure off. And we saw that at the beginning of the season with Jackson Meeks and Trevor Pena to try and force some other players to try and cover those players and take some attention off of Gadsden. But now what we're seeing is also that Syracuse receivers have started to catch the drop bug. And that's certainly not going to help Syracuse's efforts in trying to take some pressure off Gadsden, especially after that catch that Gadsden made in the corner, the one-handed, Garrett Wilson style catch. Like you, it's gonna take really monumental efforts to force defenses to try and remove focus from Gadsden, which is the main reason why he hasn't gotten the targets that Syracuse fans want him to get. It's because teams are realizing he's the biggest threat, even at tight end, and they're game planning around him. It's kind of like essentially what was going on with Kansas City at the beginning of this year. The Chiefs, they know opposing defenses know, hey, Travis Kelce's the threat. Let's make sure we cover him and force Mahomes to throw to someone else, because God knows that Mahomes doesn't have receivers that he really trusts to throw to other than Kelsey. Gets a little bit of help. DeAndre Hopkins comes in. The other receivers start to step up, and Kelsey gets opened up more. And now, he's having a mid-season resurgence. Why do I know this? Because Kelsey's on my fantasy football team. And so that helps a lot. So you need your receivers to help step up to carry the burden that is being left, because Gadsden's getting doubled. And what's not helping this Syracuse team draw people away from Gadsden, like I said, is the drops.
Yeah, and I do think that has been the biggest thing that's just out of control of Kyle McCord and out of control of this passing attack. The drops are not what you want here. And again, that's just focus, that's practice, that's execution there. The scheme, they're scheming guys open, and then they're just not executing on it at a high level here. And I do think that one of the things that has been said is that, Zeed Haynes has been absent for multiple weeks here, dealing with what will only be described as a personal matter. I'm sure we'll find out more in the offseason. What was actually transpiring here. But Dino said, leading into this past game, that we didn't expect to see Zeed Haynes heavily involved in the game plan, if at all. I would assume that we probably start seeing him worked back into the fold in this game. And he was a player, to your point, Christian. He became a nice deep threat valve that teams started focusing on before his absence, because he was burning them pretty consistently. Even if McCord wasn't making the throw to him, he would get open on his route. And I think that that's something, to your point, that can open up McCord can open up Gadsden over the middle of the field, especially if you pair him and Zeed Haynes on the same side of a formation. Make defenses make a choice between one or the other, instead of allowing them to just focus all in on Gadsden and have someone else work their way open.
It's going to be tough for Gadsden again, and just in general for this team in general, to really get that boost from Haynes' return, because what Fran said this week is that he was just lifting this week. He hadn't this entire week. He hadn't even touched the practice field yet with the team.
Oh no!
So this could be even up until next week, against UConn, where Haynes might even touch the floor, and we might not even see him in full action, maybe even until the bowl game.
That's not what you want here.
Because
I have high hopes on him.
With Fran, he's not going to put a player on the field unless he's 100% sure that he can deliver, and it's going to take a while for Haynes. We know Haynes is a good athlete, and one, we know he's a good athlete, and two, we know he wasn't out for an injury-related reason. So that shouldn't mean that it takes him too long to get him back up to speed, but it still takes a bit of time, and I don't think it's going to be this next week against Cal.
Then in that case, scrap everything that I said, and this is why we let the football reporters give the info before Andy gives the analysis here. Turns out that is a very important part of this process. Last 10 minutes here, Christian. We talked a little bit about Cal and what to expect from the Syracuse offense. Final thoughts on, obviously not where Syracuse fans wanted to be. I think that they wanted to beat one of Pitt or BC. Losing both in 3 weeks or 3 game weeks is not what you want here. But Syracuse is still going bowling. There's still plenty of things left to play for this season.
This is the thing with Fran. 6 wins is nice. We talked a little bit about this last week. 6 wins is nice. You're going bowling. For Syracuse fans, that's what you expect. Guess what? That's not what the head coach expects. And it's really, really refreshing for that. So, some of these players might be happy with 6 wins. You're going to a postseason game. And some fans might be, happy with that also. You gotta readjust expectations here. Got to do it quickly. Because it takes I can't speak from personal experience, but I can only imagine. It takes a lot to try and shift a mindset to let's try and make the postseason to, hey, let's try and play with the big boys.
Yeah,
which is what
absolutely.
Fran wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that you're going to see this was never going to be the year. There's still a lot of other games left to be played and a lot of progress to be made for the Syracuse football team here. Christian, any final thoughts before we jump into the goodbyes? Any other sports that I'm forgetting about?
Yeah, there's a certain hardwood sport that has started.
Oh, whoops.
Which is, I love this because, again, Syracuse fans have to shift expectations. If you honestly, this could be like just a microcosm of just the entire thing of Syracuse in general with this hiring of Fran Brown. If you want to be taken seriously just as an athletic institution, you've got to pump the resources into football. Football is, you can only get away with basketball as a primary sport if you are the truest of true blue bloods. And that means I'm talking Kentucky, Duke, and North Carolina. And even then, they still need football to help support the weight of basketball. Syracuse is good, don't get me wrong, but the basketball doesn't draw enough money for the programs in general around the hill to support that lifestyle. So you've got to have football, dominate the resources in order to generate more resources for your other programs to use, which is fortunately a start. For fans, that means it's going to get some adjusting. There's got to be an adjustment for fans as well to realize, hey, there's not going to be as much basketball talk in the Syracuse media landscape as you might originally are used to when you first became a Syracuse fan.
You know what? Syracuse basketball can talk to me when they go to the postseason as much as Syracuse football does.
This is indeed true. The barriers for entry into said postseason are a little bit harder in basketball, but at the same time, you should be able to, if you want to be taken seriously as a blue blood like Syracuse fans want to be as well. And just get there. Maybe something on the 15th will help some Syracuse fans. I don't think it's going to have the impact that the Syracuse fans want it to have. But because we've talked about this on this pod before, if you shouldn't have Carmelo Anthony expectations for Keon Anthony, you should have Buddy Boeheim expectations for Keon Anthony. Which means you shouldn't expect Syracuse to win a championship the second Keon Anthony walks onto the dome floor. But you could expect him to battle for the postseason by the end of sophomore, by pushing it into sophomore, but regularly his last 2 seasons on Syracuse, assuming he stays.
Oh, I forgot that decision was this week. But yeah, that's probably the biggest story pending. Syracuse doesn't choke it away against Colgate yet again.
It almost happened against the Dolphins.
Yeah, Syracuse has hosting Colgate Red Raiders Tuesday, November 12th. They're also hosting Youngstown State on Saturday. So again, next Saturday, next version of this podcast, we'll be talking about the Cal game, talking about those 2 games, but more than likely talking about, unless Syracuse finds a way to lose one of those games, we'll most likely be talking about Keon Anthony's commitment decision that will be taking place later this week, as well as some Cal football. Again, weird to talk about a conference game between Syracuse and Cal.
How about you try dealing with and logging with the woke Cal football media this week?
I'm not concerned about the Cal football media. They seem to have calmed down a bit after that whole game day and that whole Miami experience. Thankfully, mostly because look, man, it's Syracuse, man. We don't care. we are not your enemy in this one. But I think that wraps it up for Christian and I as we reach the hour mark here on the Disloyal Idiots podcast. Thank you again for tuning in and listening to Disloyal Idiots on Fans First Sports Network. Remember to like and subscribe and follow the podcast on your podcast player of choice. It helps us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. Thank you to all of you who are watching us live on Facebook, on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, wherever you can find us. We really appreciate you tuning in Sunday nights-ish at 8 p.m.-ish for the live show as you get to watch all of our reactions and whatnot. Thank you again to Home Field Apparel. Nunes24, NUNES24 for 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Thank you as always to our sister site, newsedition.com. Make sure you check them out for the best quality Syracuse coverage this season. For Steve out in the Netherverse, for Mike somewhere dealing with a broken microphone, you've got Andy and Christian here. Just happy to be here. Happy to talk about Syracuse. And as always, go Orange.
Go Orange.